Thanks very much. It's a treat to be here. I've enjoyed the visit a great deal. Wonderful hospitality, and I've really enjoyed chatting with the residents this morning and this afternoon. I feel like we've had some very good conversations. You'll have to see if they corroborate that testimony, but that's been my impression. And tonight's a talk I've never given before, and it's an experiment. And I can assure you that it'll be unusual, off the beaten track, but I don't know if it will work. So we'll see. You know, as Sancho Panza says in Don Quixote, the proof will be in the eating of the pudding. And we'll just have to see what you make of this. But the title is The Heart of Professionalism. And I'm on the national board of an organization called Alpha Omega Alpha, which is the oldest honor medical society. It's basically a distinction that our top graduates earn every year because of their outstanding performance, primarily in scholarship, you know, the grades they've earned, but factors like leadership and service and research also form an important part of our selection criteria. And we're working hard on professionalism, and I am disappointed by most of what I hear and read on the subject of professionalism. At least from my point of view, it's misguided and misses the mark. So I'm going to try to provide something that I think is more on target. So I want to introduce a mystery person. This person composed some of the most important works in each of the following disciplines: biology, physics, metaphysics, drama and poetry, logic, rhetoric, politics, and ethics. In some of these disciplines, our mystery person wrote the most important works ever composed in these disciplines. And as a further point of distinction, in some cases, he invented the disciplines, which simply didn't exist prior to the composition of his magnum opus in these respective disciplines. So we're dealing with a truly extraordinary intellect, arguably the greatest intellect in the history of Western civilization. He was born in a place called Stygira. His father was a physician to the Macedonian kings. He studied in Plato's academy for 20 years. He tutored two very important figures in human history, one being Alexander the Great, the son of King Philip of Macedon, and the other Ptolemy. You've heard of the Ptolemaic University. Universe. This is an extraordinary important person. Our mystery person eventually left Athens where he studied because he said he didn't want Athens to sin a second time against philosophy. And when he died, in his will, he asked to be buried next to his wife who preceded him in death. Who is this? Yeah, this is Aristotle, who I would say represents the greatest intellect in the history of Western civilization. And he's pictured here on our right, elbow to elbow with his teacher Plato. Aristotle's actually carrying a copy of his masterwork, The Ethics, which is the greatest work in philosophical ethics ever produced, even 2,400 years after its initial writing. He was born in 384 BC and died in 322 BC. And most of his important works he composed in about a 25-year period. And the breadth and depth of those works is simply unsurpassed. So when we think about Aristotle and look at the world through the eyes of Aristotle, we're gaining a truly extraordinary perspective on whatever matter we're examining. And I want to treat Aristotle's answer to perhaps the most important question human beings have ever posed, which is what? No, actually, it's not what, it's why. And you can pose that question about anything. Why is this? If you have had small children or currently enjoy the company of small children, you're familiar with this question. It's one of the original human questions, why? Right? Like, why must I go to bed? Or why does the sun rise in the morning? Or why am I not a horse? Now, you may have lost interest in those questions, but those are in fact the original and best questions. And insofar as we've lost interest in those questions, we've lost something of what it means to be human, which in some respects children probably exemplify better than we do. So let's think about the question of why, and we'll start with this chair. It's obviously a particular type of chair, in this case a wheelchair. But the question is, why is that a chair? Anybody recognize that chair? That's a famous chair. Better known to Americans than Canadians, but yeah, that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt's wheelchair. People didn't know it at the time, but an individual who's frequently ranked as one of the top 10, occasionally as one of the top 5 presidents in the history of the United States, was paraplegic. Basically didn't have the use of his lower limbs, could barely stand and certainly couldn't walk, and this fact was concealed successfully from the American public. He's the only person to be elected President of the United States 4 times. And throughout that whole time, he couldn't walk and could barely stand, but Americans didn't know that. Basically, the press was complicit with the White House and the Roosevelts in suppressing that, but that's just an aside. So the 4 answers to the question why from Aristotle's point of view are: first, about a chair, what is it made of? And the answer might be wood. What made it? What's the answer? A carpenter, right? Or a chair maker, a woodworker. What is it? The answer, of course, it's a chair, and that means that chair contains no wood. Let's say that chair is made completely of wood. The substances of which they're made are completely different, and yet each is a chair because the one you're now sitting in has the form of a chair. And finally, what is it for? And I guess the answer would be to provide us something to sit on, right? Now this may seem utterly obvious to you, but I would submit we do not understand professionalism. We do not understand what it means to be a scientist or a physician or a physician scientist, in large part because we've forgotten Aristotle's 4 fundamental questions, which are often called the material cause, what is it made of? The efficient cause, what made it? Let's say a woodworker. What is it? The formal cause, it has the form of a chair. And finally, what is it for? What is its purpose? Now those are questions that are easy to answer for a chair or an automobile or a flashlight. But sometimes they're not quite so easy to answer. For example, consider some natural object like an acorn. What is it made of? Well, I suppose it's made of carbon and hydrogen and oxygen, right? And other elements. What made it? An oak tree, right? An acorn is the product of an oak tree. What is it? I guess it's a seed, a particular kind of seed called an acorn. And what is it for? I suppose to make another oak tree, right? Every acorn is a potential oak tree. Now this may not sound like much, But I think this is a lesson that we have failed to learn or forgotten at our own grave peril. You and I suffer every day and fail to live up to our potential as scientists, as physicians, as human beings, because we've lost track of why things are what they are. Now that may sound preposterous, but let's explore that possibility. First we'll start, and I intend to examine only two things. One, a physician. Two, a human being. Let's ask Aristotle's 4 fundamental questions of a human being. Now you may think everybody knows the answer to that, but matters may not be so simple as they first appear. Who created that? Yeah, that's Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, right? Has to do with the perfectly proportioned human being. How many heads high is a human being when perfectly proportioned? That's what this is exploring. So, what is a human being made of? Well, this is part of the answer. What's that? What's a human being made of? Anybody?
Matters.
Yeah, partly we're matter, right? The stuff physicists deal with. We have mass. We have velocity. Of course, you and I think we're still, but in fact we're flying through space at an incredible speed in multiple different vectors, right? The rotation of the Earth around the sun, the movement of our solar system and the galaxy, the movement of our galaxy in the universe. We're moving at a breakneck pace all the time. Physics helps us understand how we are matter in motion, right? F equals ma, right? We're held to these chairs, to this floor by gravity. E equals mc squared. So in part, we're a physical phenomenon. But if you only understand a human being in the terms of a physicist, you've only scratched the surface. In a way, we're matter in motion, but from other points of view, we're a lot more. We're also made of this. What's that? Chemistry, right? So we're made up of elements and chemical compounds, right? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus. We're made up of lipids, carbohydrates, proteins, right? Nucleic acids. If you don't understand chemistry, you don't understand a human being, right? These days, if you want to be a funded researcher, you should focus your attention on molecular biology, because that's where the money is right now, primarily on molecular biology. If you want to do gross anatomy, you're dead as a fundable researcher. But again, if you only understand human beings in terms of our chemistry, you've only scratched the surface, right? Give me a cyanide pill, you'll shut down my chemistry and I'll drop to the floor. But to think of me just as a collection of chemicals or a series of chemical reactions omits too much. So then we get to this domain. What's that? We got the physical dimension, the chemical dimension, the biological dimension, right? So you and I are made up of biomolecules, cellular organelles, cells, right? Robert Hooke, first person to see cells through a microscope. The doctrine of cells, Rudolf Virchow, were made up of tissues and organ systems. If you don't understand a human being as made up of cells and organ systems, then you don't really understand what a human being is. But on the other hand, if you only understand us biologically, there's a great deal you've left out. How many cells in your body right now? Millions, billions, trillions, quadrillions? Yeah, the answer is the tens of trillions. Something on the order of 75 trillion cells. 75 followed by 12 zeros, right? The number of hairs on your head is about 100,000. The number of cells in your body is in the tens of trillions, so it's a much, 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 much bigger number. And of course, a third of those cells are erythrocytes, right? How long does an erythrocyte last? What's the lifespan of a human erythrocyte, a red blood cell? Anybody know? What is it? It's 120 days. That means every 120 days you have to replace every red blood cell in your body. How many is that? How many red blood cells in your body? Anybody? 25 trillion. Divide 25 trillion by the number of seconds in 120 days. What does that give you? A headache. The answer is approximately to the nearest million, 2 million. And what does that mean? That means in the time it takes me to say 2 million, you've just produced 2 billion red blood cells. If that's not true, you're either developing polycythemia or anemia, right? So, our bodies are extraordinarily remarkable, but as I say, if we only understand the biology, we're missing a lot. So here's another answer to the question, what are we made of? What's that? What is this? Anybody recognize it? Yeah, The Matrix, right? Keanu Reeves, the all-time highest grossing R-rated film. What? Why not?
Deep Throat probably has that. I think Deep Throat probably has that.
You might be right. I don't know. What's the idea here? The idea here is that we're not so much made of matter or chemicals or cells and organs, but the idea here is that we are in fact more than anything else made up of ideas. We are our ideas. That doesn't mean you can't give me a cyanide tablet and make me go to ground. But if you really want to understand what a human being is, you have to recognize that we're creatures made up of ideas, that our lives are shaped by the ideas that we've imbibed or invented over time. And the idea here is that that would give you an extraordinary degree of control over things like matter and chemical and organ, right? So the next question from Aristotle's point of view would be, what made it? And you can understand us in these terms. What's that?
Physics?
Yeah, basic physical forces, right? Numbering 4, a strong force, a weak force, an electromagnetic force, and a gravitational force. That's what holds us together, right? Without those, we wouldn't hang together. There wouldn't be things like molecules, elements, subatomic particles. That can take you a long way in certain respects, but it leaves a lot unanswered. Here's another thing that might have made us. The caption is now in the second law of thermodynamics, right? These are the facts of life. Where would we be without the second law of thermodynamics? Nowhere, right? Entropy and so forth. And yet, again, that only explains partly what made us. We are the product of the second law of thermodynamics, but there's a lot that leaves out. What's that? Lunch. Yeah, or dinner in this case. We're also made by the struggle to survive, right? This is the distinctive Darwinian contribution, that if you want to explain what a human being is and how human beings came to be, you need to understand us in terms of the struggle to survive. right? Why do we have color vision? Why do we have a complex vocal apparatus? Why do we have opposable thumbs? The answer is those were important to our survival, right? Hanging from branches, swinging from tree to tree, spotting predators at a great distance across the plain. That's why we have these capabilities, because they enabled our predecessors to survive. But I don't think the subatomic forces, quantum theory, the second law of thermodynamics, the struggle to survive is an adequate account of what made us. Now, you might disagree, and that's fine, but that's a subject worth pondering. So the next question becomes, what is it? Anybody read The Selfish Gene? Oxford biologist Richard Dawkins. What are we? I think from a certain point of view, a certain biologist's point of view, we are, what would you say, envelopes for our genes. Look at a person and you see a kind of genetic envelope, a vehicle to get genes from one generation into the next. That's the most important thing about us, that we are vehicles to catapult genes from one generation into the next, right? Look at my genotype. That's why I'm here. That may be true. What I'm trying to suggest to you is that our account of the human isn't entirely complete. It leaves some things out that we desperately need to attend to. Here's another account of what we are. What's that? Yeah, you know that we started out with, or our ancestors started out with tiny little brains, and over time what you see as we move from the fish to the frog to the reptile to the simian to our closest simian relative to the human is growth of the neocortex. Who has a more developed frontal cortex, a cat or a dog? Anybody know? There's a clear answer to this. Well, let me put it this way. If you've made it very clear to both your cat and your dog that they should never climb up on the kitchen table, they know that you do not want them on the kitchen table, and then you leave the house, which is more likely to get up on the kitchen table? And you can tell because of the paw prints that are left there. A cat. Anybody who knows animals knows that a cat gets up on the kitchen table when you're outside the house. The dog won't, at least is less likely to. The reason for that, at least possibly, is that dogs have a more developed frontal cortex, and the frontal cortex is very important for, what would you say, inhibition, respecting rules. You know, this is one of the things about the human, that we've got a very developed neocortex. But again, are we our brains? Maybe we are, but perhaps we're not. Who's that? Bertrand Russell, who said, "It's been said that man is a rational animal. All my life I've been searching for evidence which could support this." Does it make sense to say that we are made by our reason? That explanation makes the most sense to me. But is that even correct? We're made by the books we read. We discussed in great depth today the possibility that we are our stories. One thing that's real is this table. You bang on it, right? You run it real fast into that table, it's going to hurt. You're going to break some bones. What's most real? Matter, right? That may in fact be the case. But we considered in some depth today the possibility that that's not what's most real. What's most real are the ideas we live with, because they shape our lives more than any other. What's a radiologist? A radiologist is somebody who extracts diagnoses. from certain kinds of images. That may be true. A radiologist is somebody who generates written reports. A radiologist is somebody who generates revenue for medical practices and hospitals and healthcare systems. All of those are true to some degree. But what really is a radiologist? I think most of us don't know the answer to that question, or at least haven't thought as deeply about it as we might. What's a physician? What exactly does that question mean? So the big question for Aristotle is the final cause, the elenchus, the that for the sake of which, our telos, to use another. Why are we here? What are we for? Why are human beings on the planet Earth? Well, because, nature evolved in that direction. Well, here's one possible answer that might be relevant to radiologists. Namely, you and I are here to get rich, or at least to make as much money as we possibly can. So when I face career decisions as a radiologist, I try to determine which path offers the greatest potential for generating income, the most income, and that's the path I choose. That may be, in fact, how we navigate in life. I have doubts about that. Is Donald Trump our model as somebody who got rich, or Warren Buffett? Or the richest man in the United States, Bill Gates? Or the richest person on the face of the earth? Who's that? According to Forbes last week. Who is it? Carlos Slim, that's right. The Mexican telecom magnate. And that may not even be correct if you look at certain individuals from the Middle East. He may not be the richest, but who's the richest human being in history? Depends on how you count, but the most recent claimant to that title would be John D. Rockefeller, whose wealth vastly exceeds that of today's titans. So I want to step back and ask a question, first about the human. What are we for? Why are you here on the face of the earth? I'm here to propel my genes into the next generation. I'm here to survive as long as I possibly can. I'm here to accumulate wealth. I'm here to become famous. I'm here to acquire power over others. I mean, why are we here? That may sound like an irrelevant question, but I would submit to you that that's the essential question at the heart of our discussion of professionalism. Professionalism doesn't mean parting your hair on one side or the other. It doesn't mean, do you button your jacket or leave it unbuttoned? Do you wear a tie or not? Do you sport body piercings or tattoos? Do you sign all your medical documents within 24 hours? How long is your report turnaround time? These are all just accoutrements of professionalism, but not the core of what it means to be a professional. What exactly are physicians called to do and to be? That's a complicated question, and one I think we need to consider. And I would like to suggest that Aristotle's questions can help us sort that out. If you thought of a medical student, or a pre-medical student, or an adolescent, or a child, or an infant as a potential physician, William Osler, one of the most highly regarded physicians in Canadian history, if you saw Osler as an infant and regarded him as a potential physician, an acorn, so to speak, what would you hope he would develop into? And what role could you and I play in helping to bring that about? So I want to consider the question of the four causes, the why of a physician. What's that?
Anatomy lesson.
Yes, by? Who created that image? The anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp.
Yes, Van Dyke, I don't know.
It's a good guess. No? It's Rembrandt, right? Perhaps the greatest painter in our tradition, Rembrandt, the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp. By the way, Dr. Tulp signed off on the physicals of the first Dutch people to establish New Amsterdam, the largest city in North America, which you may know as New York City. This guy signed the passenger manifest that those people could go. So he's an important figure in history, but an important figure in anatomy in his own right. So how would we answer the 4 questions about a physician? Well, one would be that you and I are made up of knowledge or facts. To make a physician, all you need to do is transfer enough facts or knowledge into a person of sufficient intelligence, and they will know what a doctor knows. And then you can give them tests. You know, tests in medical school, board exams, and you can determine whether you have a physician. Right? To be a physician is to know things, to know a lot of things: anatomy, physiology, pathology, pharmacology, internal medicine, surgery, pediatrics. If somebody knows all that, they're a doctor. Is that what we're made of? Because that's how we assess learners, primarily. We assess our learners primarily as though the most important question is, what do they know? What facts have they assimilated? Right? Those are the tests we give, by and large. Can you recall this? Can you distinguish between this and that? And that's very important. If somebody knows nothing, they're not a physician. But that may not be the whole story. Another factor would be skills. Doctors not only know things, they can do things. Right? They know how to resuscitate a patient. CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Right? They know how to insert a central venous line. They know how to intubate somebody. They know how to perform a right upper quadrant ultrasound exam. You know, these would be the sort of things we expect physicians to be able to do. But I would say again, we are not simply what we know and the skills we have acquired. Whether we're merely competent at them or have in fact mastered them, we are more than knowledge and skills. But if that's true, what else are we made of? And of course, we know we're made up of atoms and molecules and cells and organs and tissues, but so is everybody. What is a physician especially made of? That may sound like an easy question, but I would submit that our educational system frequently doesn't know the answer to it, and the ways we assess physicians basically foster this kind of superficial conception of what a physician is made of. What made us, right? The efficient cause. This is the answer I get a lot. This organization is the Association of American Medical Colleges. I was created by the people who devised my medical school curriculum. The people who devised the instructional methods that I was subjected to. You know, it might be canned lectures on 35 millimeter Kodachrome slides. It might be something cutting edge like problem-based learning or team-based learning or some new interactive software program, but that's what made us. The instructional methodologies. Or perhaps I was made by the assessment techniques. I knew I had this exam coming up at the end of my 4th year, and I studied for it and studied for it and studied for it, and that exam made me what I am today. I am the product of all the exams I ever took, of the people who wrote those exams. That's how we treat doctors and radiologists today. You are what you learned for your test, and because you passed the test, you're a doctor or you're a radiologist. That is an exceedingly shallow conception of what it means to be a radiologist and a physician. I'm the product of the tests I took. If that were true, we'd be in serious trouble. Partly because there's a whole lot of what I am and what you are that was never tested. I never filled in an oval with a number 2 pencil. I never sat down at a computer and punched in my answers, right? There's a whole lot vital about us that defines us, that determines whether we're merely good or frankly excellent, that we've never been tested over. We're not just the sum total of the tests we took, and we're not just the product of the people who devised those tests. But what else are we, right? The next question would be, what are we? This is the Penguin edition of the Hippocratic writings. What exactly is a doctor? Is the doctor the person who knows how to do CPR? The doctor who can describe the gross anatomy of the human heart? Somebody who understands the mechanism of action of Prozac or Prilosec? Yeah, there's a good chance a doctor could do that, but that's not what a doctor is. Somebody who knows pharmacology or physiology or anatomy, somebody who understands diagnosis and therapeutics. There's more to being a doctor than that. And in some respects, we've lost the thread of what it means to be a doctor precisely because we're so resolutely forward-looking, always focused on what the future of medicine is going to bring, and sometimes we lose our connection with the great traditions of medicine's past. And I would personally put in that pantheon the Hippocratic writings. In particular, just for the sake of argument, the Hippocratic Oath. That little 320-word text offers deep, deep insight into what it means to be a physician. But, you know, how many of us reflect on it on a regular basis? And then the most challenging question of all, what's sometimes called the final cause, the purpose, what are we for? What are doctors for? Doctors are to achieve high customer satisfaction surveys. Doctors are to avoid errors in healthcare. Doctors are to maintain a complete electronic healthcare record. Doctors are to generate revenue in excess of costs. Doctors are to manage costs. Doctors are to improve efficacy. Why are we here? I think most of us work and live as though we think patients exist for doctors. I'm a fully qualified physician. To do what I do, I need patients. And so these people called patients come to me, and I do my thing. And I do it well, and I generate revenue and get high customer satisfaction scores. That's what it means to be a doctor. How easily do we forget that, in fact, the only reason there are doctors, the only reason we have physicians, is because there are patients. How easy is it to forget that the patients are our reason for being? But you know, we practice as though they're, they are a factor in a healthcare equation. Sometimes we practice as though they're a nuisance. You know, these patients keep bugging me. They're slowing me down. They want to talk to me. And I got to get them off my back so I can return to full productivity, right? I hear that. Where does that come from? Do you recognize this guy? He's the greatest physician poet of the 20th century. What? This is William Carlos Williams. If you've never read the poetry of William Carlos Williams, you should. And the thing to start with, which you could get online at no cost, is the chapter in William Carlos Williams' autobiography called The Practice. It's only a couple thousand words old, but it's a beautiful statement of what physicians are for. Williams, by the way, delivered 3,000 babies. He was not an obstetrician. He was what we would call a family physician. But over the course of his long career in Rutherford, New Jersey, he delivered over 3,000 babies, most in their own homes, not in a hospital. So this guy, had his sleeves rolled up and really knew what it was like to work hard as a physician, but wrote some of the great poetry, essays, and drama about not only about medicine, but about life. And here's a line from Williams. For under that language to which we've been listening all our lives, a new, a more profound language, underlying all the dialectics, offers itself. It is what they call poetry. That is the final phase. This is a crazy idea. But what if I said our careers as physicians and our membership in the medical profession is ultimately about expressing to the fullest extent we can what it means to be a physician and why there are physicians. You might say, gee, I don't even know what that means. Where's the revenue generation in that picture? Where's the efficiency factor in that equation? I'm not suggesting we disregard revenue or efficiency. I'm just suggesting that what we're really about has a lot less to do with physics and chemistry and biology, about the strong and weak nuclear forces and Gibbs free energy and the role of catalysts in biochemical reactions has less to do with that than we commonly suppose, and a lot more to do with something like poetry. What do I mean poetry? I think that I shall never see. No, that's not what I mean. I mean, what account can you personally give of what it means to be a physician? I would submit to you that your excellence as a physician is directly correlated with your ability to give an account of yourself as a physician. What would you talk about? Your granddaughter, who may not even be born yet, comes up to you and says, "You're a physician, right? What does that mean?" It means I go to the hospital every morning at 8 a.m. and I come home every day at 6 p.m. It means I'm legally authorized to prescribe medicines. It means I'm a card-carrying member of the Canadian Medical Association. Here, you want to see? Right? What does that mean? So you're a doctor. Tell me what that means. I think most of us would be thunderstruck. But it's a question we need to ponder. I think it's the very heart of professionalism. I'll give you an example of that. From a physician who never spoke a word. But this is what I mean by poetry, and I'm going to conclude with this. A head and neck cancer patient was admitted to the ENT oncology service and was going to have surgery, pretty extensive surgery, the next morning. Now, I hate to say this, but this patient was known to the members of the service as a dirt ball. Does anybody know what a dirt ball is? If you've ever read Samuel Shem's The House of God, you might have some inkling of what a dirt ball is. What's a dirt ball? Basically a non-paying patient who doesn't take good care of himself or herself, who can't be relied upon to comply with medical recommendations. Somebody who doesn't come from your side of the tracks, maybe doesn't speak your language or doesn't speak the English language the way you do, who doesn't enjoy your level of education, who perhaps doesn't have a source of income, may not even have an address. So this dirtball is admitted one evening, surgery coming up the next morning. Patient has a long history of cigarette smoking, alcohol use. Everybody on the team's thinking, you know, she brought it on herself. We can all see that. Her disease is a direct product of the way she's lived her life. And shame on her. You know, she's getting just what she deserves. You know, we're gonna take good care of her, we're gonna do her surgery, but we've got no sympathy for her. So the night before her surgery, the surgical team walks into her hospital room. This is a true story. Surgical team walks into her hospital room. They're not going to waste much time on her, but you know, they explain, we're going to be doing the surgery tomorrow, here's what it involves. You know, you can't have anything to eat or drink after midnight, etc. And then they start to leave the room. And as they start to walk out, the patient pulls out a handful of little packets. And she hands one of the packets to each member of the team as they leave the room. So the attending walks out, the fellow walks out, the senior resident, the junior resident, the intern, the fourth-year medical student, the third-year medical student. She hands each one of them a packet as they walk out. You know what was in those little plastic packets? Here's your poetry test, your poetry self-assessment. Each of those little packets had mustard seeds in them. Does that mean anything? You tell me. As the team exited her room and walked out into the hallway, beginning with the attending, every single person as they walked by promptly deposited that packet in the trash bin. Without any comment, just kind of shaking their heads, how stupid, and each one dropped their packet in the trash bin. Except for one. That person was the last person to leave the room. That person was a third-year medical student. The least qualified person on the team, who really didn't know squat about the surgical procedure that was going to be done the next day. Couldn't have written the pre-op orders, couldn't have written the post-op orders. Didn't know the first thing about squamous cell carcinoma, you know? But that person, the lowest person on the team, kept that packet of mustard seeds. And that person still has that packet of mustard seeds a few decades later. That's never going to be tested on the boards. There are no exams in medical school about packets of mustard seeds. But that student knew what that meant. And that student kept those mustard seeds. And that act, the student spoke no words, that act was poetry. That's somebody who understood what physicians are for. Somebody who understood the final cause of physicians, that for the sake of which, as Aristotle would have said, the purpose of being a doctor. I wish I could give you, you know, the 7 habits of highly professional physicians, or the 10 criteria for evaluating physician professionalism, including things like dress and grooming, right? Professional demeanor. Do you look the patient in the eye? Do you shake the patient's hand? Do you use the patient's name? Do you ask the patient if they have any questions? Wouldn't it be nice if that's what it means to be a professional? But the sad, or from my point of view, wonderful thing is, none of those get much below the surface of what being a professional really means. And I would suggest if we want to understand the heart of professionalism and what it means to be a professional, we need to attend to Aristotle's 4 causes. And above all, the final one of those 4 causes, why are there doctors in the first place? And what does an excellent physician really look like? That's the heart of professionalism. All right, I'm going to stop there. This is, I know, an unusual talk. It may be a useless talk, but my hope is that it will have, spurred some reflection or objections, corrections. Undoubtedly, I got some things wrong. I just don't know which they were. So, and as I said this afternoon, it's really a crushing blow to give a talk like this and then have it meet with stony silence. So this is a summons to the compassion of the health professions in the room to come to the aid of a vulnerable fellow human being by saying something.